God, may our lives, may our words, may our actions, may we give glory to you alone. May we be willing to be open to the places where you call us to go, to the places where you lead us, to be able to learn how to love you with our heart, soul, and mind and strength, be able to learn how to love our neighbor as ourselves. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So there was a pastor once who was giving a sermon, and in the front row sat Martha, who was there every week and who was, probably one of his biggest rallying supporters. And so the pastor started going on about people and how they abuse alcohol, and she's going, "Yeah, you go, pastor, you go, pastor." And then he started talking about, people who um, misuse drugs, and she says, "Yeah, keep going, pastor, keep on going." And then he starts talking about, and then there's all these people, they're caught, and they gossip about one another, and they're reading all the gossip magazines about what's going on with the different celebrities, so they can have the latest dirt on all these things, and they're sharing stories about one another behind cross fences. And she said, "Hold on, pastor, you're meddling now." Um, one of the things about what I do is that sometimes I do meddle. Sometimes I do step into those places where things are uncomfortable, and one of the things about what I do as a public proclaimer of what God is talking about in scriptures is that it leads you into uncomfortable situations, because there are times where it's not as easy as we want to make it sometimes. Yeah, have you ever noticed that when Jesus is asked a question, a yes or no question, that he never answers with yes or no? It's always, "Let me tell you a parable. Let me tell you a story. Let me ask you a question back." And yet, I think so many times in the midst of our lives, we run into those times where we're asked those yes or no questions, which are not really yes or no questions. It's much more of choose this group or choose this group over here. And so I'm going to enter into some of that today. We are going to get into the gospel. We are going to get into the Old Testament and some of the other readings, some other additional readings with that. But I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to follow Jesus' kind of pattern, and I'm going to tell you a story first. So many of you know that before I went into ministry, I spent a number of years in the Army. I was a part of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Now, cavalry is, I used to have a sign on my office wall, a little cartoon. It was a guy on a stick horse with the big cavalry black Stetson on and riding around the stick horse. And you have the guys with the straight jacket coming to get him, and the sign said cavalry. It's a state of mind. And it is, we did everything different. So everybody else called it a brigade, we called it a regiment. Everybody else called it a battalion, we called it a squadron. Everybody else called it a company, we called it a troop. Why? Because we were cavalry and we were different, and that's the way we were. But we did things that were different to be a part of that as well. So we did things that were a part of shaping us to be able to say, you know what, we're different, and we do different things because, not because we're better than everybody else, but because we are in our own way. We are unique. We do things. And so one of the things that cavalrymen are expected to do, if they're going to stay within the cavalry very long, is they're expected to do something called a spur ride. So a spur ride is 24 to 48 hours of some of the, the one where I earned my spurs, I could not move the next day. It was intense. It was, and so you go through all this stuff, and again, you're earning that right. So where if you see, whether you go to Fort Hood or another place where they have cavalry, I didn't serve with 1st Cav, I served with 2nd Cav, but cavalrymen will wear a black Stetson with the gold band around it, and to be able to wear that, you have to have gone through a spur ride. You have to have completed this to be able to do that. Typically, they're also wearing spurs on the back of their boots, not because they actually are going to ride horses, but because it's a symbol of, hey, I've earned this right. I've earned this privilege. So, as a young second lieutenant, green out of, Texas A&M, I go into the second cav, and of course, I go out and the first chance I get, I try to earn my spurs. It actually takes me 2 tries to do it because I come in and I don't know all the different pieces. I don't know all the different equipment, so that's part of it. So, but I do. As a young second lieutenant, I earned my spurs, and there was a time where, after I had earned mine, where they asked, particularly my first sergeant was asking all the platoon sergeants, hey, if you haven't earned your spurs, you need to go ahead and earn your spurs. Sergeant First Class Eric Rubley was my platoon sergeant. He had 22 years of experience in the Army when I had 0. So, and that's the way it works. You have a platoon sergeant who's there to take a platoon leader. The platoon sergeant has 20 plus years of experience. The platoon leader is just coming in fresh out of college and fresh out of officer basic course, and they form a team, or at least the best ones do. And Eric and I, we were. He had to train me how to be a platoon leader, and we had a really good relationship back and forth. For example, I knew that no matter what, on Friday evenings, that unless it was an emergency, I didn't call him. That I would, if there was something that had to happen, then I would, and if I had to call him, I also had to call the other squad leaders, because he just needed that time on Friday to just unwind. That was just who he was. He'd been doing this for 22 years. He understood who he was. Anyway, so they had pushed all the platoon sergeants, as an officer, I'd already done this. But as platoon sergeants, maybe not such a big deal to them. He has 22 years in the Army. He doesn't need one more thing. He doesn't need another hat that he has to wear or anything else like that. So, but he goes and he does it. And so I remember I was walking along with him as he was going through this, and he got to the end of the towards the end of the exercise, and they had a big suspended saber up out in the training area, and one of the captains out there who was in charge of the spur ride, everybody's kind of gotten to this point that, all you have to do is bow down and say these words, and you'll have earned your order to spur. And Eric says, I'm not bowing down to anything. I won't do it. And so this captain and a couple other officers are, hey, come on, he's your platoon sergeant. All he's got to do is he's got to do this one thing. He's just got to bow down. He's just got to do this, and he's done. Now, again, I don't know. Again, we had a little bit of a discussion on this afterwards, but I don't know that it was truly a religious issue or something to him. But it was serious. He was not going to do this, and I was absolutely going to support him in this. Hey, you're my platoon sergeant. I know you. I trust you. I trust you in my life. So yeah, if you don't want to do this, don't do it. So, but it also got, that was one of those things that opened my eyes a little bit, because when I'd gone through it, I didn't even think about it. Okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'll do this. I had 0 years of experience. Somebody says, go do this. Go do this. But that got me thinking. And so you're going to, as people who know me know that I'm one of these people who unfortunately, I have this brain that never shuts off. That's a gift and that's a curse. And so you get kind of both sides of that. So I maybe think about things a little bit differently, sometimes maybe a little bit more deeply than the average person does. And part of it goes back to some of these experiences and seeing people, I'm not going to do this. What's up with this? What's the story? What's behind this? And again, so many things in life are presented one way, but they may be actually much more complex than that. So we come into this last week of the story of Jesus, and Jesus is in Jerusalem at this point. So he's entering into discussions back and forth with the Pharisees and the Herodians and the scribes and the chief priests and the Sadducees and all these different groups. All of them want a piece of Jesus, and all of them want to in some way discredit him. So, when Jesus is asked this question, you have to understand that it's not an honest question. that the question that Jesus asked, is it legal, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not, is either way you answer it. In the words of Admiral Akbar, it's a trap. It is, if Jesus says, yes, it's lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, then the people who are following him around are going to say, I don't want to pay taxes to a foreign leader. Oh, what's up with this Jesus? Okay, we're done with him. And that was one option that the Pharisees and the Herodians wanted. The other option is if Jesus says no, then, well, look, here's a traitor. Here's a person who has betrayed Caesar, who is advocating that we don't have to pay taxes to Caesar anymore. Take him away. So it is very much a trap. And again, as I said, Jesus doesn't answer with a yes or no. Doesn't answer a yes or no question with a yes or no. Answers with a question. Answers with a story. Answers with having them enter into this. And in the midst of this, I'm going to go back to actually a couple passages out of the Old Testament. One which we just read. One which is the Isaiah passage. Now, as Tom read that, I'm guessing that most people kind of heard that passage. Here's Cyrus. Who in the world is Cyrus? My anointed. What does that mean? And the entire passage itself doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. It's actually one of those passages, and there's several of these in the Old Testament. It's actually a passage that's really, when you understand what's going on, it's pretty, whoa, that's actually there? So first, who is Cyrus? Well, Cyrus is not a Jewish king. He's a Persian king. He is Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia. And why does this matter? Well, the Babylonians had conquered Judah and Jerusalem and taken people into exile, and then the Persians eventually conquer the Babylonians. Well, so now here is a foreign king who God is saying, Cyrus, you are my anointed one. And to understand what that word there is, that word anointed one is Messiah. That's literally the word that's behind it. The word that we translate Christ. You are the one who I have appointed. You are the one who I am working through. That now it's not just, a Davidic king, King David, or one of his heirs. Now it's this Persian king, this guy from Iran who is not even Jewish, not even understands anything about God, who God is now working through. On the one hand, this is not the first time that the prophets have said something like this. When the Babylonians were conquering Jerusalem, Jeremiah was saying, and this Nebuchadnezzar is God's way in which God is punishing us. It did not go over real well. That's one of the reasons Jeremiah underwent so much persecution. But in the midst of this, it is the understanding that, well, God creates all things. I create light and darkness, wheel, which again is an unusual word. I create things that are good, and I create things that are woeful. That God is responsible for all of this. God is the God of all these things. So, on the one hand, Jesus is tapping into this understanding of who is God. Well, what does it mean to give that to God, that which is God's? As Lutherans, we talk about ultimately our lives all of it should give glory back to God alone. That's what our lives are about, is to give glory to God. And this is tapping into that reservoir, that understanding that God's not just the God of Jerusalem, not just the God of the people who are a part of the church, not just the God of some small area, but God is the God of the entire world, the entire universe. And that God can use people who we don't expect to be a part of what God is doing. And so, yes, indeed, even those Romans, even those in Jesus' day, even the emperor, even though the emperors had done some things that had raised up a lot of ire among a lot of the Jewish leaders at the time, as you think back through Jesus' story, there's a centurion who comes to Jesus and asks him to heal his servant. And not only does he ask him to heal his servant, but says, I'm not worthy for you to come under my house, so just speak the word and it's done. And this is one of the great faith people that Jesus lifts up. One of two people in the Gospels who Jesus says, I've not found faith like this in all of Israel. And then there's another one who, he goes to the synagogue leader, and the synagogue leader comes to Jesus and says, please go to this the centurion's house and take care of his daughter. And so he goes to the man's house and raises his daughter from the dead. So it's not that Jesus understands the way a lot of people would have understood, hey, there's them and there's us. I think so many times he encounters people as first, here's another person who has that need, who has that, who the kingdom of God can reach, and it's not just the people who we would say are our neighbor. Who is my neighbor? Well, let me tell you a story about that, And of course, he tells the story of the Great Samaritan, or Good Samaritan about that. Another image I want to lift up from the Old Testament is one I've been working with in my personal devotions over the last week or so. This is the image of the golden calf. This is kind of interesting. This image is Damien Hirst. It's the golden calf. This was in 2008 was the highest amount paid for an art item to a living artist. It happened the week before the financial crash. Called the golden calf. Something kind of profound. Something like 11.5 million pounds. But anyways, the golden calf, which comes from the people of Exodus, when the people have come out of Egypt, they've gone out into the desert, they've gone to Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up the mountain, received the Ten Commandments, come back. He's given the Ten Commandments to the people. Moses goes back up the mountain to get the instructions for how the people are to live and how they're going to build the tabernacle. And while Moses is up there, the people come to Aaron and they say, okay, we don't know what's happened to this Moses guy. Give us gods. Give us gods that we can worship. And Aaron says, okay, give me your gold earrings, and cast the calf, and people begin to dance around. They begin to worship that. And again, God is heartbroken about this. God is furious about this. But they want gods that they can see, gods that they can control, gods that they can move, gods that they can understand, gods that represent the things that here's where we're going to put our trust in. And I think one of the struggles is that, well, what are you going to put your trust in the midst of this? And so many times when we come up to those either or questions, one of the questions I ask is, what golden calf means? What is the idol that we've set up that is that everybody else is dancing around, and that we've ruined the party. One more Old Testament image before I get back to our craft. The other piece is in the creation narrative. So the word, whose image is on this point comes up a couple times. The word there is the same word that God uses in Genesis when he talks about, God has created humankind in God's image. Male and female God has created them. That word image comes up again and again in the creation narrative. And the word comes up again and again and again in this story back and forth with Jesus. Well, whose image is on it? Well, it's render to give to Caesar that which is Caesar, give to God that which is God's. And that understanding of, but you are created in God's image. And that you yourself are a gift from God. You yourself are an image of God. You yourself are a part of what God has done. Okay. That being said, there are some times where it is a trap. And there's lots of times, I think, in our time and our society where different things are set up where it's asked as a question to get you to, hey, pick this side or pick this side. And almost all the times when that is set up, it's a false dichotomy. It's a false, well, no, I don't agree all the way to this or all the way with this, but I think we get kind of pushed and the peer pressure gets to us and, hey, just fit in, belong here. You can bite your tongue on this to belong, to be a part of this. So, I'm going to share a lot of different things, but when it comes to, for me personally, I struggle with a lot of things. I struggle with a lot of things just in relation to sometimes day-to-day things. So, for example, I have nothing against the Pledge of Allegiance, but I do have some trouble sometimes saying it. And the reason for that is that for me, Christ is always first. And that is my primary place where I don't consider, the confession I make to Christ and any confession I would make to anything else on the same level. That's always, for me, that's always first. And that always does create a little bit of discomfort for me. But I think sometimes we also get that, again, I think for a lot of people, you'll see the word, when it talks about the flag, they'll say, hey, this is sacred. Well, no. To be honest, it's not. It's important, it's high value, but sacred is a word where we say this is holy. And I think the other thing is, and think about, if the flag was truly sacred, we wouldn't put it on bags, we wouldn't put it on bathing suits, we wouldn't put it on shirts, we would do all kinds of things. But it also gets into that place where I think we have that place of discomfort. We have that place where, well, what's the right amount of place where we do different things, and it comes up in lots of different ways. And for example, I have a lot of friends who are very different people, very different ways of looking at the world, and it's amazing how much we don't talk to each other anymore, how hard it is sometimes to talk to each other anymore. Even when we may believe very different things, we're answering those questions slightly differently because, hey, I belong to this group over here, I belong to this group over here. So, going back over the last several years, this is one that has been there. It's been something we've dealt with. It's been something that I think has been a part of our that conversation that we need to have within our country that we're so afraid to have. We had over the last several years the whole issue of Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and all these other pieces of this. And I think we're told, hey, you can be a part of one or you can be a part of the other. And it's just not true. Now, I know it's hard, and I know we get pushed in that way to where, hey, I can be a part of this or I can be a part of this. I have no problem with a person saying, you know what, we need to be able to speak up about when it feels like a group doesn't feel like their life matters. Now, I also understand that on the other side, there are, police officers are in a place where they have to make hard choices every single day, and it's not an easy thing. And I think we get pulled in one way or the other. Hey, you have to either side this side or side on the other side. Well, let me be real honest. If we've had situations like this, when we've had people who have been police officers who've been in front of our building and who have been letting people in and out, and we've had, thankfully, we've only had one, but have an instance where a police officer gets aggressive with one of you, you better believe I'm going to say something about it. I'm going to do something about it because I care about it. And not because I'm angry at the police officer, I want the police officer bad or anything else like that, but I want you to protect me. And at the same point, again, I think we sometimes get into these, it's all this or it's all that. And so, again, unfortunately in our national debate, that's where it sometimes gets to. And so, you've got to make up your own mind. You've got to figure out where you're at on this. I'm not going to say I'm right on all these different things. But, something happened to me this week that, again, just kind of got my mind thinking. So Chris and I had the opportunity to go to a Dallas Stars game. And so, they have the national anthem come up. If you've ever been to a Dallas Stars game, every single time in the national anthem where it says Stars, not that they're singing, they shout that out. And it was one of these things of, huh, okay, this is different. And again, I'm an outsider. I've not been a Stars fan all my life, and so again, for most people who have been, it probably just, oh, this is second nature, is what we do, and I'm sitting here on the outside saying, that's not the way the answer. And again, it's just one of those things that got me thinking. The one that I thought about before this one, and I apologize for any Kansas City Chiefs fans. This is one I know because I'm a Chargers fan, and Chargers play at Arrowhead every year. So you hear this. So at the very end of the anthem, when they sing it at Arrowhead Stadium, and the home of the Braves, the Chiefs. Oh. Again, and when you're a part of a group, hey, that's okay, but in other situations, it's not. And again, I think that's one of the places where it gets hard. It gets hard. It gets sticky. It gets uncomfortable. And I don't know what exactly the right answer is on all of these things, but it is. How do we talk about some of these things? Let me talk about one that's been current this week. So after Harvey Weinstein, many of the allegations came out. If you're on social media at all, you've seen kind of the Me Too stuff. And on the one hand, it's uncomfortable, and it should be. It's uncomfortable to see people you know who've been hurt, who've been, whether harassed or assaulted. And I don't know about anybody else. I'm enough of a guy to where, how do we fix this? And I know that's exactly the wrong thing at that point. Because ultimately, the first thing we need to do is we need to be in a place where we can say, you know what, I hear you, I see you, I honor you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this has happened. And I may not be able to fix it, and I'm not going to give you and I think we want to move to those quick, easy answers of, and there are certainly things we need to say, hey, this is right, this is wrong, but I think so much of, having to figure out and renegotiate some of that dating landscape when I was in my late 30s and 40s, opened my eyes to, there's a number of things that I didn't think about it when I was younger. But there are certain things that are right in one situation and absolutely wrong in another. And sometimes it's hard to figure that out. I'm a reasonably emotionally mature person. I've probably to a fault erred on the side of caution on a lot of those things. But how do we help young men and women say, well, this is what is okay and this is what is not okay? How do we get to the point where we hold young women and young men into this conversation and into this place where we can say, you know what does it mean to be a person of faith and to be a person who is trying to date or trying to, flirting back and forth or all these other pieces. Those are hard discussions to have, but honestly, those are discussions we need to have. It is, because I know that in 10 years we could have another one of these events and we'll have a whole nother set of, Me Too about it. But I think sometimes we need to be able to be at the point where, how do we get to the point where in the future maybe we can not have at least some more, at least fewer of these people who can say, yeah, this happened to me too. And I don't know. I mean, these are hard questions. They're taxing questions. They are the questions that, quite honestly, they're questions of faith. They're questions of life. They're the questions of, well, how do we navigate this world? How do we find our way in the midst of it? I could easily step back and skate around it and not go into some of these things. It'd be a whole lot easier on my life. But I don't think that's faithful, because I think that those are the kind of questions that, what does it mean to live today? People sometimes ask me, well, what is God asking of me? What What is God wanting of me to do? What does it mean to follow Jesus today? And, ultimately it's going into some of these hard things, going into some of these hard pieces of what is a faithful life in the midst of that. How do we as people of faith be a place where we can talk about some of these hard things, where we can come together and we can encounter one another. And again, the gift of being community is that we have people who are not all the same all the time. How can we come to some of these questions that say, "Oh, choose this side or choose this side"? And answer with a question or answer with a story, or try and walk a middle road in the midst of it. And I'll be honest. These readings that come up over the next couple of weeks, with the exception of next week, we're doing Reformation. Where Jesus is in conflict with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and scribes and the chief priests and the elders. When he's arguing back and forth with them, and he gives them kind of that, he doesn't answer their questions, or he takes the middle road, or he does something else like that. Ultimately, these are the questions that lead up to Jesus' crucifixion. So there are times where it is hard. Now, I'm not looking to go out and be crucified, thank you. But I know that these are hard questions to enter into. I know these are hard places to stay in. But I do think as people who are created in the image of God, as people who, as much as we may not like it, sometimes cast our own golden calf. Sometimes, bow down to idols and we may not even think about it. Who sometimes wonder, well, what does it mean that God is the creator of not only me, but this nation and this world and this universe, and how do I live within it, and where is God at work? Ultimately, faith is not lived primarily on Sunday morning. It's lived in Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday. It's easy to be faithful. I know it's much harder to be faithful out in the midst of the world, out in the midst of, and it's much easier to, choose this or choose this. Okay, well, this is what you want me to choose, so I'll choose this. They're taxing questions. And they are questions that are questions of faith. I'll be the first to admit that sometimes I get them wrong. I'll be the first to admit that I sometimes have failed when it comes to asking these questions. I've chosen the easy path of, well, this is the answer I know you want. Okay, I've probably meddled enough. I probably have stirred up the pot plenty. So I'm going to close with a little bit of prayer. Let's pray. Lord God, we ask that you would help us learn how to love you with our whole heart. Learn how to love our neighbor as ourselves. Help us at those times where you would answer with a question or a parable or a story. Be curious. Ask. That we may be willing to learn what it is to learn to know our neighbor, to learn to love our neighbor. God, I know this is hard. Give us courage. Give us strength. Give us your peace. In Jesus' name.